Sherman Hemsley was the man everyone loved to watch as George Jefferson, the funny, confident, and unforgettable character who made the Jeffersons a hit. The show was more than just a comedy. It was a big part of TV history. But did you ever wonder what Sherman Hemsley was really like behind the scenes? The truth is there were things most fans never knew about his time on the show. Now, we will reveal it all, from the surprises to the secrets that made the Jeffersons so unforgettable.
This is just like that Dracula movie I saw on TV last night.
Will you shut up?
The Jeffersons was a groundbreaking TV show that centered on George and Louise Jefferson, a married couple who moved up the social ladder from a modest life to wealth and success. George Jefferson, played by Sherman Hemsley, was a bold, outspoken businessman who owned a successful dry-cleaning chain. He was confident, sometimes brash, and never afraid to speak his mind, which made him both hilarious and unforgettable. Louise Jefferson, played by Isabel Sanford, was the calm, wise, and loving partner who balanced George's fiery personality. She was patient, supportive, and often the voice of reason in the household, guiding George and even giving him a reality check when his confidence or stubbornness went too far. Their dynamic was the heart of the show, blending humor with moments of real-life challenges that families could relate to. The series also explored their relationships with friends, neighbors, and their son, Lionel, highlighting the everyday struggles and joys of a family adjusting to wealth while staying true to themselves. The Jeffersons wasn't just about laughs. It also touched on issues like race, class, and social mobility, showing a black family breaking barriers on television in a way that hadn't been seen before. What made the show so special was its mix of comedy, heart, and real-world lessons. George and Louise were more than characters. They represented ambition, love, and the challenges of success, all while keeping viewers entertained week after week. Sherman Hemsley was the man who brought George Jefferson to life, the sharp-tongued, loud, and unforgettable character who made the Jeffersons one of the most iconic shows of all time. But here's the twist. Sherman himself was nothing like George in real life. On screen, George was bold, proud, and always in everyone's business. Off-screen, Sherman was the complete opposite. He was shy, soft-spoken, and intensely private. While George loved the spotlight, Sherman avoided it as much as possible. He stayed away from the Hollywood limelight and kept his personal life such a mystery that even some of his closest co-stars admitted they didn't really know much about him. People often described him as reclusive, someone who preferred quiet over the chaos of fame. But behind that quiet personality was a man with a powerful story. Sherman Hemsley was born and raised in South Philadelphia by his hardworking mother, who made her living in a lamp factory. Life wasn't easy, but she held the family together. Sherman didn't even meet his father until he was 14 years old. That meant most of his early years were shaped by his mother's determination and strength. So while audiences laughed at George's over-the-top personality, the real man behind the character was living a very different life, one that many fans never really got to see. And that's what makes Sherman's story so fascinating. The man who made millions laugh was, in reality, someone who found comfort in keeping to himself. Sherman Hemsley's path to stardom was anything but ordinary. He wasn't born into fame, and nothing was handed to him. He had to carve his own way. After finishing middle school, Sherman started high school at Central High, but later switched to Bach Technical High School. Even then, school didn't quite feel like the right fit for him. After the 10th grade, he made a bold choice. He dropped out. But instead of giving up, Sherman took a new direction. He joined the United States Air Force and served his country for 4 years. That experience gave him discipline and structure, but deep down, Sherman's true passion was always the stage. After his service, he pursued his love for acting, and soon he got his big break on Broadway in the play Pearlie. His performance was so good that he ended up touring with the show for an entire year. While Sherman was still enjoying his time on stage, fate knocked on his door. Legendary TV producer Norman Lear noticed his talent and wanted him to play a new character on his hit sitcom All in the Family. The character's name? George Jefferson. At first, Sherman didn't want to leave the stage behind. He loved Broadway too much. But Norman Lear saw something special in him and told Sherman he would keep the role open until he was ready. That's how badly Lear believed Hemsley was the one. 2 years later, Sherman finally took the leap and joined the cast. At first, George Jefferson and his wife Louise, played by Isabel Sanford, were just occasional supporting characters on All in the Family. But audiences loved them so much that they got their very own spin-off in 1975, The Jeffersons. And what a ride it was! The Jeffersons turned into one of Norman Lear's most successful sitcoms, running for an incredible 11 seasons, from 1975 to 1985. That's a full decade of laughs, lessons, and George Jefferson's unforgettable walk across the TV screen. In 2003, something surprising happened. Sherman Hemsley, who almost never gave interviews, finally sat down for a rare video chat with the archive of American television. Fans were excited because Hemsley was famously private. He didn't like the spotlight much, and he usually kept his personal thoughts to himself. But this time, he opened up about the role that made him a household name, George Jefferson. Hemsley admitted that stepping into George's shoes wasn't easy at all.
Why?
Because George Jefferson was nothing like Sherman in real life. George was loud, cocky, and always ready to put someone in their place with a sharp remark. He was deliberately rude, and it was played for laughs. But Sherman himself? He was quiet, private, and even shy. So, imagine that a man who preferred to stay to himself now had to become a character who lived for attention. Hemsley said, "Playing George Jefferson was hard for me, but he was the character. I had to do it." And that right there is part of what made him such a talented actor. He didn't just play George Jefferson. He transformed into him. Night after night, season after season, Hemsley carried George with such confidence and humor that people forgot it was all an act. Audiences believed it because Hemsley threw himself completely into the role, even if it went against who he was at his core. It makes you think, how many times do we see actors on screen and assume they must be just like their characters? With Sherman Hemsley, the truth was the complete opposite. The man who brought us one of television's funniest, most fiery characters was actually humble, quiet, and happiest away from the spotlight. And yet, without him, George Jefferson and The Jeffersons itself would never have been the same. The Jeffersons wasn't just another sitcom. It was one of Norman Lear's biggest hits, lasting an incredible 11 seasons from 1975 all the way to 1985. The show had broken barriers, made people laugh, and even pushed tough conversations about race and class into living rooms across America. But while fans loved the series and the characters George and Louise Jefferson had become fans a proper goodbye after such a long and successful run, the way the show ended shocked almost everyone. CBS suddenly pulled the plug. The cancellation wasn't planned, and there was no final episode to wrap things up for the Jefferson family. To make it even worse, the cast wasn't even told directly. Sherman Hemsley, the man who made George Jefferson unforgettable, later revealed that he found out the show was canceled the same way fans did, by reading about it in the newspaper. Imagine working on a hit show for 11 years and then discovering it's over from a headline instead of the network you worked for. Imagine working on a show for more than a decade, pouring your heart into it, becoming like family with your co-stars, only to find out it's over by reading it in a newspaper or hearing it on TV. That's exactly what happened with The Jeffersons. When CBS decided to cancel the show, they didn't give the cast or the audience the respect of a proper goodbye. No big finale, no closure, just an abrupt end after 11 incredible seasons. Isabel Sanford, who played Louise Jefferson, didn't even hear the news directly. She only found out because her cousin read about it in the tabloids.
Can you imagine?
After all those years of hard work, that's how she discovered the show was ending. Isabel later spoke out and said she felt the cancellation was downright disrespectful. It wasn't just her. Sherman Hemsley, the man who made George Jefferson unforgettable, also learned about the cancellation in the most shocking way, by flipping through the newspaper. And Franklin Cover, who played Tom Willis, discovered it while casually watching Entertainment Tonight. None of the actors were told face-to-face. The decision was made quietly behind closed doors at CBS, then announced publicly during their upfront presentation in May 1985, months before the final episode aired. To the network, it was just business. But to the cast and fans, it felt like a cold and sudden ending to a groundbreaking show that had made history. The sudden ending left both fans and the actors stunned. Many felt that after all the years of success and cultural impact, the Jeffersons deserved a proper farewell episode, one that celebrated the characters who had become so loved. But that never happened, and the controversy around its sudden ending has remained one of the most talked about parts of the show's history. After the Jeffersons came to an end, Sherman Hemsley didn't just disappear from television. In fact, he kept working regularly, though he often found himself typecast in roles that looked and felt a lot like George Jefferson. That loud, quick-tempered, and funny personality had become so iconic that Hollywood often wanted more of the same. Still, fans were thrilled any time Hemsley reunited with Isabel Sanford, his on-screen wife Louise, in the years that followed. Through the mid to late 1990s, and even into the early 2000s, the two popped up together in all kinds of surprising places. They guest starred on shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where audiences loved the nostalgia of seeing George and Wheezy back in action. They also appeared in a string of commercials for The Gap, Old Navy, and even Denny's, always playing off that familiar husband and wife chemistry that fans had cherished for years. Their partnership was so strong that they even made appearances at unexpected events, like dry cleaning conventions, bringing laughter and a touch of showbiz flair to everyday gatherings. Audiences never got tired of watching them together, and for a while, it felt like George and Louise Jefferson might just keep popping up forever. Sadly, as Isabel Sanford's health began to decline, their appearances together became less frequent. She passed away in 2004, closing a chapter on one of television's most beloved duos. Even so, their legacy as George and Louise Jefferson lived on, proof that their on-screen marriage wasn't just entertaining, it was unforgettable. 8 years after Isabel Sanford passed away, fans of the Jeffersons faced another heartbreaking loss. Sherman Hemsley, the man who brought George Jefferson to life with so much energy, humor, and attitude, also died. He passed away on July 24, 2012, at his home in El Paso, Texas. He was 74 years old. The cause of his death was linked to a serious health condition called superior vena cava syndrome. This happens when a large vein near the heart gets blocked, often by a tumor. In Sherman's case, doctors discovered he had a cancerous mass in one of his lungs. The medical report explained that chemotherapy and radiation treatments had been recommended for him, but sadly, his health complications were too much to overcome. Sherman's death marked the end of an era. For decades, audiences had loved him for the sharp wit, fiery personality, and unforgettable catchphrases he gave George Jefferson. Even after the Jeffersons ended, his name remained forever tied to that iconic character. His passing was deeply felt, not only by his fans but also by the entertainment world, which had come to respect him as one of television's most memorable comedy stars. After Sherman Hemsley's passing in 2012, many stories about his personal life began to surface, and they revealed sides of him that fans never really knew. For most people, Sherman was George Jefferson, loud, fiery, quick-witted, and larger than life. But in reality, he was a very private man who kept his personal life carefully hidden from the public. One of the biggest surprises for fans was the revelation that Sherman was gay. He never spoke about it publicly, never gave interviews on the subject, and never shared that part of his life with the world. Back in his era, especially during the height of the Jeffersons in the 1970s and 1980s, it was much more difficult for celebrities to be open about their sexuality. The entertainment industry and society as a whole wasn't as accepting as it is today. So, Sherman chose to keep that part of himself private. He never married, and he had no children, which made many people curious about his personal relationships after his death. Not long after, an article in Out magazine shed more light on his private life. It suggested that Sherman's longtime partner was a man named Kenny Johnston. According to the report, Sherman lived with Johnston and his close friend and manager Flora in Chinton, who had been with him for more than 20 years. Flora described Sherman as a humble, kind soul who loved music, spirituality, and living a quiet life away from the Hollywood spotlight. In fact, She was listed as the sole beneficiary of his estate. But the story didn't end there. A man from Philadelphia named Richard Thornton stepped forward, claiming to be Sherman's half-brother. Thornton argued that, as family, he should inherit Sherman's estate instead of Flora. This claim led to a legal battle, which kept Sherman's funeral and final arrangements on hold for months. After carefully reviewing the case, however, the judge ruled in Flora Inchinton's favor, recognizing her as the rightful heir. The controversy around his estate added unexpected drama after his passing, but it also highlighted just how private Sherman had been in life. Even in death, people were learning new things about him, from his hidden relationships to the quiet, spiritual way he chose to live outside the spotlight. In 2025, a surprising revelation about Sherman Hemsley's personal life came to light through someone who knew him well. Damon Evans, who played Lionel Jefferson on The Jeffersons, opened up in an interview with The Advocate. He explained that, like himself, Sherman was gay, something that many in Hollywood circles already knew but was never openly discussed at the time. Evans described it as an open secret. He said that he and Sherman often crossed paths in the same social spaces, the same bars, the same parties, even the same hangout spots. To those who were around them, it wasn't shocking, but Sherman himself was very private. Evans recalled, he was dating a Puerto Rican guy. They lived together. His boyfriend even came to our tapings. This glimpse behind the curtain painted Sherman in a new light. While he made millions laugh with his big personality on screen, off-screen, he preferred to live quietly, away from too much attention. Evans admitted that he never understood why Sherman felt the need to keep it so hidden. But Sherman simply didn't like the spotlight when it came to his personal life. Fame, interviews, or gossip, none of that appealed to him. In a way, this revelation explained a lot about Sherman Hemsley. He wasn't just private because he wanted to protect his image. He was private because that was truly who he was, a man who loved to perform on stage but who craved peace and quiet in his real life. And in the 1970s and 80s, when it was much harder to live openly as a gay man in Hollywood, keeping things low-key was, for him, the safest choice. Sherman Hemsley left behind much more than just the sound of George Jefferson's unforgettable laugh. His legacy is one that stretches across television history, comedy, and even cultural change. When people think of classic sitcoms, The Jeffersons almost always comes to mind, and that's because Sherman made George Jefferson one of the most memorable TV characters of all time. What made him so special was his ability to take a character that could have easily come off as grumpy, arrogant, or selfish and instead make him deeply funny and lovable. George Jefferson was loud, opinionated, and stubborn, but thanks to Sherman's sharp timing and unique style, audiences rooted for him. Viewers saw pieces of their own family members in George, the uncle who always spoke his mind, or the father who worked hard but wasn't afraid to be blunt. Sherman gave that role heart, and in doing so, he gave Black families in America a strong, complex representation on screen at a time when it wasn't common. But Sherman's legacy goes beyond just one role. He was part of a generation of Black actors who broke barriers on television. Before shows like The Jeffersons and Good Times, TV often pushed Black characters to the background or gave them roles filled with stereotypes. Sherman helped change that. George Jefferson was a successful businessman, a proud homeowner, and a man moving up in the world, proof that Black characters could lead shows with power, humor, and dignity. Even though Sherman was famously shy and private off-screen, his performances showed that he poured everything into his art. His work inspired younger actors and comedians, who looked at him as proof that you didn't need to fit the mold of a traditional leading man to make an impact. You just had to be authentic, original, and fearless in your craft. His influence can still be seen today. Sitcoms that highlight bold, outspoken characters, from Martin to The Bernie Mac Show to Blackish, all owe something to the path Sherman helped pave. The George Jefferson walk, his quick one-liners, and his high-pitched laugh became part of TV culture, still recognized and imitated decades later. Sherman Hemsley also showed that legacy isn't only about fame, it's about consistency. He wasn't in the headlines every day, and he didn't chase celebrity status. Yet the body of work he left behind continues to make people laugh and think. That's the mark of true greatness, when your art keeps living long after you're gone.